A scream of injustice echoed through the court hallways, silencing everyone present. Maria Oliveira, a determined 38-year-old lawyer, felt the weight of the world on her shoulders that decisive morning. The case that could define her career was about to begin, and she knew that every word, every gesture would be crucial. Hello, don't forget to sign up, short, and comment below. With steadfast steps, Mary crossed the imposing doors of the hearing room, her mind freaking through every detail of the case. In his pocket, his mother's old pen, a silver Parker with golden details, seemed to pulse with the energy of generations of justice fighters. Mary hardly knew that that seemingly common object was about to trigger a series of events that would change not only her life, but the judicial system itself. The sun had barely risen when Maria Oliveira woke up that Thursday morning. The 38-year-old lawyer knew that would be a decisive day in her career. After months of preparation, it was finally time for the final hearing on the case that could define his reputation in the legal environment. With precise and almost automatic movements, the fruit of years of routine, Mary rose from the bed, her thoughts already completely directed to the court. As she walked to the bathroom of her apartment in the city center, she mentally reviewed every argument, every evidence, every possible objection that the prosecutor could raise. Under the strong jet of the shower, Mary felt the hot water relaxing her tense muscles, but her mind remained in utmost alertness. After carefully arranging, the lawyer opened her wardrobe and selected her most imposing suit, a tailor-made blue C-set that highlighted her stylish and professional figure. The impeccably worn white shirt and the silk scarf on her neck completed the look that she knew was crucial to passing the image of trust and authority before the jury. As she dressed herself, Mary couldn't help her eyes turning to the little red velvet box that rested on her hairdresser. There inside was the object that, for her, carried a much greater significance than its material value. The Parker pencil that had belonged to her mother, Helena Oliveira, one of the most respected lawyers who have ever acted in that district. With almost reverential care, Mary opened the box and took the pen in her hands. The silver body and the gold details still shone like new, despite more than 40 years of use. She could feel the weight of family history in her hands. That same pen had signed some of the most important cases of her mother's career, and now she would be with her at this crucial moment. Keeping the pen in the inner pocket of the blazer, right next to the heart, Mary felt a wave of confidence and determination invading. It was as if her mother was there, giving her strength and wisdom to face the challenge that awaited her. With one last look in the mirror to check her appearance, she took her Italian leather paste and left the apartment. The city traffic was already starting to become chaotic when Mary got into her compact car. Normally, she would take the route to make calls or review some documents, but that morning she chose to remain silent. I needed total concentration on what was to come. Upon arriving at the imposing forum building, Mary was welcomed by a small crowd of reporters and photographers. The case had attracted considerable media attention, and she knew that every word, every gesture of her would be analyzed and dissected in the news that night. With the serious and determined expression she had perfected over the years, she crossed the siege of journalists without making statements. Already inside the building, Mary found her team of assistants waiting anxiously for her. Carlos, his secretary more than 5 years ago, handed him a cup of green tea, his favorite drink for moments of tension. Meanwhile, Ana and Pedro, the young lawyers she was mentoring, kept her updated on the latest details and movements related to the case. With only 15 minutes left for the start of the sitting, Maria and her team headed to the courtroom. The lawyer could feel the weight of her mother's pen in her pocket, like a talisman that gave her strength. Upon entering the courthouse, she immediately noticed the imposing presence of Judge Claudia Mendez, known for her rigorous and inflexible posture. Judge Mendez, a female in her 50-and-a-half years, with brown hair trapped in a severe coquet and penetrating look, was a respected and feared figure in legal circles. His reputation for severity and unrestricted attachment to the letter of the law was legendary. Mary knew she would face a challenge and so much to convince that judge. As the parties took their seats and the bullshit in the room diminished, Mary organized her documents on the defense table. It was at that moment that she removed the pen from her pocket, carefully placing it next to her notes. Parker's silver glow captured the fluorescent light from the courthouse, almost as if it was emanating an aura of its own. The justice officer announced the jury's entry, and everyone rose up in respect. Mary took advantage of those seconds to make a quick, silent prayer, asking for strength and clarity for the moments that would follow. When everyone sat down again, Judge Mendez hit the hammer, officially opening the sitting. The prosecution presented its initial allegations, painting a dark picture of Maria's client, a businesswoman accused of tax fraud and money laundering. The prosecutor, Dr. Santos, was known for her eloquence and ability to touch the jury with emotional narratives. Mary observed carefully, making occasional notes with her mother's pen. When it was her turn to make the declaration of opening for defense, Mary rose up with confidence. She could feel every look in the room converging to her figure. With a firm and clear voice, he began to expose the main points of his argument, methodically deconstructing the accusations of the prosecutor's office. It was in the middle of his exhibition that the unexpected happened. While gesturing to emphasize an important point, Mary accidentally dropped her mother's pen. The precious object rolled through the polished court floor, stopping at the feet of Judge Mendez. A tense silence fell on the room as Mary, momentaneously confused, interrupted her speech. Judge Mendez leaned on her chair, her eyes fixed on the fallen pen. With a deliberately slow motion, she rose and descended to catch the object. Mary felt her heart accelerate. That pen wasn't just a writing tool. It was a link with her mother, a symbol of everything she represented in the world of law. Holding Parker, the judge examined her for a few moments, which seemed an eternity to Mary. Then, to the surprise of all present, a slight smile formed on the magistrate's generally austere lips. "This pen," she said, with a voice that echoed in the quiet room, "belonged to Helena Oliveira, didn't she?" Mary, still standing in front of the defense table, confirmed with a nod, unable to hide her surprise. Judge Mendez continued, her tone now loaded with an emotion rarely demonstrated. "I had the honor to work alongside her mother in one of the first cases I followed as an intern, more than 25 years ago. Helena Oliveira was a woman of unique integrity, a true defender of justice." The environment in the courthouse has changed noticeably. The jurors, who until then eyed neutral expressions, now seemed to look at Mary with a new interest. The mention of Helena Oliveira's name had brought an additional weight to her daughter's presence in that court. Returning the pen to Mary with a respectful gesture, Judge Mendez added, "I hope, Dr. Oliveira, may you honor your mother's legacy not only by carrying her pen, but also her principles." With these words, she returned to her seat, indicating that Mary could proceed with her argument. That unexpected moment brought a new dynamic to the trial. Mary, restored, and with the pen back in her hands, felt a renewed determination. She resumed her exposition with redoubled vigor, aware that she was now not only defending her client, but also the name and reputation of her family. The hours passed as Mary presented evidence, interrogated witnesses, and rebuked the prosecution's arguments. Every move, every word she wrote, she felt the weight of the pen in her hand, constantly reminding her of the standard of excellence she should maintain. The jury seemed to oscillate between the prosecutor's convincing arguments and Mary's passionate and meticulous defense. The lawyer knew that every detail could make the difference between her client's freedom and condemnation. She exploited every legal gap, every inconsistency in the evidence presented by the prosecution, always signing a respectful and professional tone that clearly impressed Judge Mendez. When the time for the final claims came, Mary stood up for the last time, feeling the weight of everything that was at stake. She looked at the pen in her hand, then at Judge Mendez, and finally at the members of the jury. With a voice filled with conviction, she began her final speech. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," began Maria, "during this trial, you have heard a series of serious charges against my client. The prosecutor's office painted a picture of a woman driven by greed, willing to break the law for her own benefit. But I ask you to look beyond appearances, beyond easy assumptions." She took a break, letting her words penetrate. Then, slightly raising the pen, he continued. "This pen that surely belonged to my mother, a woman who dedicated her life to the search for truth and justice. She taught me that the role of a lawyer is not just to win cases, but to ensure that justice is done. And that's what I'm asking you for today. Justice." Mary then proceeded to a methodical recapitulation of the evidence, highlighting the inconsistencies in the prosecution's argument and reinforcing the strengths of her defense. She talked about her client's history, her contributions to the community, and how the charges against her were based on misinterpretations of complex business transactions. "My client is not a criminal," declared Maria with conviction. "She is a businesswoman who, like many others, has sailed through the turbulent waters of a complex and sometimes contradictory tax system. His actions, seen in the appropriate context, reveal not an intention to fraud, but a genuine effort to fulfill his obligations within the limits of the law." As Mary approached the end of her argument, she could feel that she had captured the full attention of the jury. Even Judge Mendez, known for her impassive stance, seemed to be listening with renewed interest. "Ladies and gentlemen," concluded Mary, "you have in your hands not only the fate of a woman, but the very essence of what justice means in our society. I ask you to examine every evidence, every testimony with the same care and attention that I have devoted to this case. And when they do, I'm sure they'll come to the only possible conclusion, that my client is innocent of the charges against her." With these final words, Mary returned to her place, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and relief. She had given her best, honoring not only her client, but also her mother's legacy. Now, all we had to do was wait for the jury's verdict. The hours that followed were of intense expectation. While the jury was deliberating, Mary remained in the court waiting room, mentally reviewing every argument, every moment of the trial. Her team surrounded her, offering words of encouragement and confidence, but she barely heard them. His thoughts were focused on the pen he still held, what it represented, and the responsibility he carried. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, came the announcement that the jury had reached a verdict. With her heart accelerated, Mary returned to the courtroom. The silence was palpable as everyone waited for the decision that would change lives. The jury spokesperson stood up, holding a piece of paper containing the fate of Mary's client. In a clear voice, he announced, "We, the jury, consider the defendant innocent of all charges." A murmur of surprise and relief passed through the room. Mary felt a wave of excitement invading, but retained her professional composure. Her client, in tears, turned to hug her, murmuring words of gratitude. The defense team celebrated discreetly, while the prosecution accepted the defeat with professional resignation. Judge Mendez, after confirming the verdict, looked directly at Mary before making her final considerations. "Dr. Oliveira," she said, "his defense was exemplary. You have demonstrated not only legal skill, but also integrity and commitment to justice. Your mother would be proud." These words touched Mary deeply. While the sitting was closed and people were starting to leave the courtroom, she stayed for a moment, holding her mother's pen. At that moment, he felt that he had not only won a case, but also honored a legacy. In the days that followed, The case was widely discussed in legal circles and in the media. Many commented on Maria's ability to conduct such a complex defense, but what stood out was Judge Mendez's mention of Helena Oliveira's integrity and legacy. For Mary, success in this case represented more than a professional victory. It was the confirmation that she was on the right track, following her mother's footsteps not only in the profession, but in the principles that guided her career as a lawyer. In the following weeks, Mary received numerous messages of congratulations and requests for interviews. Professional colleagues, some of whom had worked with her mother, contacted her to express their admiration for the way she had conducted the case. However, in the midst of all this attention, Mary remained focused and humble, constantly remembering the values that her mother had taught her. A month after the trial, Mary was invited to give a lecture at the law school where her mother had taught for many years. As she climbed the podium in front of a crowd filled with anxious students and respected teachers, Mary felt the weight of the pen in her pocket, as a silent reminder of the legacy she carried. She began her speech by sharing the history of the pen, using it as a metaphor to discuss the importance of ethics and integrity in legal practice. Mary emphasized that true success in the legal profession is not measured only by victories in the courts, but by the ability to remain faithful to the principles of justice and equity. As she spoke, Mary noticed the attentive gaze of the students, many of whom seemed to be inspired by his words. She remembered herself at that age, sitting in the same chairs, listening to her mother passionately speaking about the nobility of the legal profession. After the lecture, a young student approached Mary, her eyes shining with admiration. "Dr. Oliveira," she said, "his mother was my inspiration to enter the law school. Listening to you today made me sure I chose the right path." Those words touched Mary deeply. She realized that her mother's legacy went far beyond the pen she carried. She was alive in the lives she had influenced and continued to influence through Mary. In the months that followed, Mary was increasingly involved in challenging and high-profile cases. Her reputation as a skilled and ethical lawyer grew rapidly, attracting clients who sought not only legal representation, but also integrity and commitment to justice. One of those cases brought her back to Judge Mendez's court. This time, Mary defended a group of residents from a needy community who were fighting against the demolition of their houses to give way to a luxury venture. The case was complex, involving issues of right to housing, urban development, and corporate interests. As she entered the courtroom, Maria felt Judge Mendez's gaze on her. There was a glow of recognition and expectation in the magistrate's eyes. Mary knew that this case would be different from the previous one. There was no jury, and the decision would rest entirely in the hands of the judge. For weeks, Maria worked tirelessly, diving into legal precedents, interviewing residents and urban planning experts. She used her mother's pen to make notes, feeling as if every word she wrote connected her with Helena's wisdom and experience. The day of the final hearing came, and Mary presented herself before Judge Mendez with a serene confidence. She began her argument, painting a vivid picture of the threatened community, not only as a set of houses, but as a rich and vital social fabric. "Very meritorious," said Mary with her clear and firm voice. "What is at stake here is not just a piece of land or a set of buildings. We're talking about homes, stories, lives intertwined over generations. The law must protect not only property rights, but also the fundamental right to dignity and community." As Mary spoke, she noticed a subtle change in the expression of Judge Mendez. The magistrate, known for her impassive posture, seemed to be truly engaged, her attentive eyes following every gesture, every word of Mary. The lawyer continued, presenting a series of meticulously constructed legal arguments, interwoven with the residents' personal stories and socio-economic data that demonstrated the devastating impact that the demolition would have not only on the directly affected families, but on the entire social structure of the region. "Your Excellency," concluded Mary, "we have before us an opportunity to affirm that justice is not blind to human contexts, that it recognizes the intrinsic value of communities. I ask you to consider not only the cold letter of the law, but its spirit, the spirit that seeks to protect the most vulnerable and preserve the social fabric that unites us as a society." When Mary finished her argument, a profound silence fell on the courtroom. Judge Mendez remained silent for a few moments, her gaze fixed on Mary, as if she was pondering not only the words she had just heard, but the whole weight of the moment. Finally, the judge said, "Dr. Oliveira, your presentation was impressive. You not only defended your clients with skill and passion, but also reminded us of the true purpose of the law. I will need time to carefully consider all aspects of this case before I make my decision." In the weeks that followed, while awaiting Judge Mendez's decision, Maria continued her work, now with a new perspective. The case of the threatened community had touched something deep in her, reviving the passion for social justice that her mother had always cultivated. She began to devote part of her time to pro bono work, offering free legal assistance to individuals and communities who could not afford legal representation. Mary found that this work, although often challenging and emotionally exhausting, brought a satisfaction that no high-profile case could match. One day, while working in her office, Mary received an unexpected call. It was Judge Mendez's secretary, informing that the decision on the community case was ready and would be announced the next morning. That night, Mary barely slept. She turned around in bed, thinking through every argument, every detail of the case. In a moment of silence, she took her mother's pen, which she always held on the table, and held it against her chest. "Mom," she whispered in the dark, "I hope I'm making you proud. I hope to be using this gift you gave me to make a difference, just like you did." The next morning, Mary went to the court, feeling the family weight of the pen in her blazer's pocket. The room was crowded, community residents, reporters, lawyers, and curious, all eager to hear Judge Mendez's decision. When the judge entered the room, a tense silence fell on the crowd. Mary could feel the tension in the air, fear and hope tangible among the residents she represented. Judge Mendez began to read her decision, her clear and firm voice echoing throughout the room. Mary listened attentively, her heart speeding at every word. And then, finally, came the verdict. Considering all the aspects presented, including the social and human impact, as well as the legal arguments presented by the defense, this court decides in favor of the residents. The demolition order is revoked, and negotiations are decided to be started for a solution that preserves the community and takes into account the development needs of the city. A roar of joy broke out in the courtroom. Residents hugged each other, some crying of relief and happiness. Mary felt a wave of emotion invading, a mixture of joy, relief, and a deep sense of fulfillment. As the room was slowly emptying, Judge Mendez made a gesture for Mary to approach. "Dr. Oliveira," she said with a rare smile, "your mother would be extremely proud. You not only won this case, but reminded us all of the true purpose of the law." Mary thanked, feeling tears forming in her eyes. She touched the pen in her pocket, feeling as if, somehow, her mother was there, sharing that moment of triumph. In the days that followed, Mary reflected on the significance of that victory and on the road that had led her there. She realized that every case, every challenge, every moment of doubt and triumph had been an essential part of her journey. Her mother's pen, which she initially saw as a fortune talisman, now represented much more. It was a symbol of continuity, of a legacy of justice and integrity that extended through generations. Mary understood that her responsibility went beyond merely winning cases. It was about using the power of the law to make a difference in people's lives. to give voice to those who had no voice. With this renewed understanding, Mary committed herself to continuing the work that her mother had begun. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, more battles to be fought in courts and outside. But now, more than ever, she felt ready to face them. His mother's old pen would continue to be his constant companion, not only as a writing tool, but as a reminder of the power of words, the importance of integrity, and the lasting impact that a life devoted to justice can have. And so, Maria Oliveira continued her journey in the world of law, carrying with her not only her mother's pen, but also her spirit, her passion, and her unwavering commitment to justice. Every word she wrote, every argument she presented, every life she touched was a tribute to Helena Oliveira's legacy and a promise for the future. A future in which the law would truly be an instrument of positive change and justice for all. As the months passed, Mary's reputation as a lawyer committed to social justice grew rapidly. She became a well-known figure not only in the courts, but also in the communities she defended. Her compassionate approach and her ability to explain complex legal concepts in an accessible way have made her a valuable ally for many who felt marginalized by the legal system. One day, Mary received an unexpected call. He was the dean of the law school where his mother had taught. He invited her to take on a position as an assistant teacher, giving lessons on constitutional law and social justice. The proposal surprised Mary. Teaching had never been part of her plans, but the idea of influencing the next generation of lawyers, just as her mother had done, intrigued her. After much reflection, Mary decided to accept the challenge. She saw this as an opportunity to expand its impact, shape young minds, and inspire them to use law as a tool for social change. However, she asked to keep her legal practice active, firmly believing that practical experience was essential for effective teaching. In her first class, Mary entered the crowded auditorium, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She put her notes on the podium and, as always, placed her mother's pen next to them. Looking at the anxious faces of the students, she recalled her own journey and the impact dedicated teachers had had on her life. "Welcome to the Constitutional Law and Social Justice class," she began. "Before we dive into the books and cases, I want all of you to think for a moment. Why did you choose law? What do you expect to with this training?" The students' responses ranged from career ambitions to genuine desires to make a difference in the world. Mary listened carefully, noting the glow of idealism in the eyes of many students. "The law," she continued, "is more than a set of rules and procedures. It is a powerful tool to shape our society, to protect the vulnerable, and to correct injustice. In this course, we will not only learn the letter of the law, but also explore its spirit and its potential to create positive change." Through the semester, Maria challenged her students to think critically, to question assumptions, and to consider the ethical and social implications of legal decisions. She brought real cases of her practice into the classroom, showing students how the principles they were learning applied in the real world. One day, during a heated discussion about a controversial civil rights case, Mary noticed a quiet student at the back of the room. After the class, she approached the young woman. "You seemed to have something to say during the discussion, but remained quiet," Mary gently observed. "Would you like to share your thoughts now?" The student, named Louisa, hesitated for a moment before speaking. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of emotion and nervousness, met those of Mary. Finally, she took courage and began to share her story. "Professor," said Louisa, her voice trembling slightly, "the case we discussed today, about discrimination in the workplace, this is not just an academic exercise for me. It's the reality of my family." Mary listened carefully, perceiving the pain behind the young student's words. Louisa continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "My mother She worked for 15 years in a company. She was dedicated, competent, always praised by her colleagues. But when a new manager took over, everything changed. He started making comments about her age, hinting that she was too old to keep up with changes in the company. Louisa took a break, breathing deeply before continuing. In the beginning, it was just comments. But soon, my mother began to be left out of important meetings, began to receive less relevant tasks. It was like they were trying to force her out. Mary agreed comprehensively, acknowledging the common standard in cases of age discrimination. She held her mother's pen, gently turning it between her fingers as she listened, a habit that she had developed over the years when she concentrated intensively. One day, Louisa continued, her voice now a mixture of sadness and anger. My mother was called to the HR office. She was told that her position was being restructured and that she was being fired. But it was obvious what was happening. 2 weeks later, they hired someone 20 years younger to do exactly the same job. Mary felt a wave of empathy and indignation. "Louisa," she said gently, "I am very sorry that your mother has gone through this. It is precisely this kind of injustice that labor law should prevent." Louisa stood still, tears shining in her eyes. "The worst of all, teacher, is that we couldn't do anything. We consulted a lawyer, but the fees were too high. My mother was unemployed. I was still a student. We just couldn't afford." It was at that moment that Mary felt something burning within her. Louisa's story was not unique. It was a reflection of a reality faced by countless people who were powerless in the face of injustice because they did not have access to adequate legal representation. "Louisa," said Mary, her voice full of determination, "thank you for sharing this story. You have just shed light on a crucial problem in our justice system: unequal access to legal representation." The student looked at Mary, a mixture of surprise and hope on her face. Mary went on, her mind already bursting with ideas. "You know, Louisa, law should not be a privilege of the rich. It should be a tool of justice, accessible to all. Your story has made me realize that we need to do more than just teach the law. We have to find ways to put it into practice for those who need it most." At that moment, holding her mother's pen, Mary had an idea that would change not only her career, but the lives of many people. "How about," she proposed, her eyes shining with enthusiasm, "if we started a free legal aid project here in college? We could recruit volunteer students to work under the supervision of experienced lawyers, offering legal advice to people who cannot afford a lawyer." Louisa looked at Mary with admiration. That would be amazing, teacher. I could help as many people as my mother." Mary smiled, feeling a wave of energy and purpose. "Then let's make it happen. We'll start small, but I'm sure we can grow over time. Would you like to be one of the first volunteers, Louisa?" The young student said enthusiastically, a smile illuminating her face for the first time since the beginning of the conversation. That night, while Mary was planning the first steps of the project, she looked at her mother's pen, now resting on her desk. She thought of how Helena always said that the true purpose of law was to serve people, especially those who most needed protection. "Mother," Mary whispered to herself, "I think I have found a new way to continue her legacy." In the days and weeks that followed, Mary worked tirelessly to turn her idea into reality. She submitted the proposal to the college administration, recruited fellow lawyers willing to oversee the work of the students, and began organizing training for the volunteers. The Free Legal Assistance Project began modestly, with a small improvised office in an unused classroom. Mary and a dedicated group of students, including Louise, spent their nights and weekends serving people in the community who needed legal guidance. Initially, cases were mainly minor consumer disputes, family law issues, and tenants' problems. But as the word spread, the project began to attract more complex cases, including discrimination at work, like what Louisa's mother had faced. One day, about 6 months after the start of the project, Louisa ran into Mary's office, her eyes shining with excitement. "Professor," she exclaimed, barely containing her joy. "We did it! We just won our first case of age discrimination." Mary looked at her student with a mixture of pride and curiosity. "Tell me everything, Louise," she said, gesturing for the young woman to sit down. Louisa began to report the details of the case, a situation surprisingly similar to the one her own mother had faced. Under the careful supervision of Maria and other volunteer lawyers, Louisa and her student team had built a solid case, meticulously collecting evidence and preparing convincing arguments. "The judge was very clear in his decision," Louisa explained, her radiant face. "He said the company had clearly violated the laws of age discrimination and ordered not only the reintegration of the employee, but also the payment of compensation for moral damage." Mary felt a wave of emotion invading. This was not just a win-win case. It was proof that his project was making a real difference in people's lives. It was the confirmation that law, when accessible to all, could indeed be a powerful tool for social justice. "Louisa," said Mary, her proud voice, "you and your team have done an amazing job. This case goes far beyond a single victory. It sends a powerful message to employers across the city." The young student assented, her eyes shining with a mixture of joy and determination. "Professor," she said, "when I started law school, I wanted to make a difference, but I didn't know how. Now, thanks to this project, I know I can really help people. That's why I chose law." Mary smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She took her mother's pen, which she always held by, and held it for a moment, thoughtful. "You know, Louisa," she finally said, "my mother used to say that the true power of law lies not in books or courts, but in the lives that we can change with it. You and all the other students involved in this project are proving how true this statement is." That night, after everyone had left, Mary stayed in her office, contemplating the future. The Free Legal Aid Project had grown beyond her initial expectations, and she knew this was just the beginning. As she looked out the window toward the illuminated campus, Mary felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had found a way to combine her passion for teaching with her desire to do justice, creating a legacy that went beyond herself. With her mother's pen in her hand, symbol of a legacy of integrity and commitment to justice, Mary began sketching plans to expand the project. She dreamed of a future where access to justice would not be a privilege, but a guaranteed right for all. And so, Maria Oliveira's journey continued, not only as a lawyer or teacher, but as a catalyst for change, inspiring a new generation of law professionals to use their knowledge and skills to make the world a fairer place. His mother's old pen, once a mere memorial, had become a tangible symbol of that mission, a constant reminder that the true power of law lies in its ability to transform lives and societies. Over the years, Mary's Free Legal Assistance Project has become a successful model, nationally recognized. Law schools across the country have started implementing similar programs, inspired by the pioneering work of Mary and her students. One day, Mary received an unexpected phone call. It was the Minister of Justice, inviting her to lead a national task force aimed at improving access to justice in needy communities. The invitation surprised her, but Mary knew this was an opportunity to expand the impact of her work on an unprecedented scale. Before accepting the invitation, Maria gathered her staff and her most dedicated students. She wanted to make sure that the project they had built together would remain strong even with their temporary absence. "This is not the end of our journey," Maria told her team. "It's an opportunity to bring what we've learned here to a much wider audience. Each of you has a crucial role to play in continuing this work." Louisa, now a trained lawyer and one of the main contributors to the project, took a step forward. "Don't worry, teacher," she said confidently. "We'll take care of everything here. You taught us well." With a heart full of pride and gratitude, Mary accepted the minister's invitation. In the months that followed, she worked tirelessly, traveling the country, listening to stories from marginalized communities, and developing strategies to make the justice system more accessible and equitable. During this period, Mary gained close contact with her college staff. She was excited to learn that the project continued to grow and thrive, with new students joining the cause every semester. A year later, Mary returned to college for a special ceremony. The Free Legal Assistance Project was celebrating its 10th anniversary, and she had been invited as the lead speaker. As she climbed the podium, Mary felt the familiar weight of her mother's pen in her pocket. She took it off and held it for a moment, feeling like Helena was there with her. "When I started this project," Mary began, her voice echoing through the crowded auditorium, "I had a simple dream: to make justice accessible to everyone. Today, looking at all of you, I see that that dream has become much bigger than I could ever imagine." She took a break, looking at the attentive faces in the audience: students, colleagues, community members whose lives had been touched by the project. "This pen," continued Mary, raising it so that everyone could see, "it belonged to my mother. She used it to fight for justice at a time when few women occupied the courts. I carried it with me as a reminder of your legacy. But today, I realize that the true legacy is not in this object, but in each of you." Mary looked at Louise, who smiled in the front row. "It is in students who have become lawyers passionate about social justice. It's in the lives we change, the communities we strengthen, the injustices we correct." She took a final pause, feeling the emotion in her voice. Access to justice is no longer a distant dream. It's a reality that we're building together, day after day. And as long as there are people willing to fight for what is right, our work will continue. With these words, Mary concluded her speech. The audience burst into applause, many with tears in their eyes. As she came down from the stage, Mary was embraced by Louisa and other alumni, now fellow professors. That night, back to her office, Mary looked once again at her mother's pen. With a smile, she carefully placed it in a glass box that she had prepared. Next to the pen, she placed a picture of her mother and a recent photo of the entire Legal Assistance Project team. Mary knew it was time to pass the rod. The pen had fulfilled its purpose, inspiring her throughout her journey. Now, exposed in that box, it would serve as a reminder to everyone entering that office, a symbol of the lasting power of justice and the importance of fighting for the rights of others. As she closed the office door, Mary felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her mother's legacy lived not only through her, but through every life touched by the project, every student inspired to make a difference. And so the story of the old pen came to an end. But the impact it had inspired would continue to spread, touching lives and shaping the future of justice for generations to come. Mary smiled, knowing that her journey, and the journey of all those she had inspired, was far from over. The work of making justice accessible to all would continue, guided by the spirit of that simple pen and the remarkable woman who had possessed it.